Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are sharing some key takeaways from this year's National Association for College Admission Counseling Conference, NACAC for short. I believe this is the biggest annual gathering of college admissions professionals. So, we're so lucky to be joined by two of our amazing InGenius Prep colleagues who attended in person, Katherine, who's our Director of Undergraduate Services, and Pia, our Director of Counselor Management. So, Katherine and Pia, it's so great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, very excited to talk about what we found out during the conference. And it was such a fun time kind of getting to connect with people in our industry too.
I think I want to kick off with painting the big picture first. I want to hear from the both of you of the overall impressions of this year's admissions landscape, because we've seen a lot of changes this year, from policy shifts to new trends, etc. So what kind of stood out to the both of you this year about the admissions landscape?
I think that there were maybe 20 different sessions focusing on AI in some respect. So it's definitely something that is on everyone's minds. A lot of the focus was on how college admissions counselors and college admissions readers are using AI in their practice, different types of best practices there. Of course, there was a big focus on the international student population and different trends in enrollment that we're seeing. And of course, as you mentioned, the political implications of our work. That was a focus from the policy and advocacy side of NACAC. NACAC does have a big policy arm, and they are advocating for college admissions professionals in all levels of government. So that was an exciting thing to see as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with the ever-changing landscape, especially in terms of politics, I think there's been a lot of confusion and anxiety for students and for counselors too, as they're trying to adapt and guide their families and their students the best they can. And I think there was a lot of takeaways about how to focus on the work and move forward despite kind of all the confusion that might be happening as a result of the political landscape.
Katherine, you mentioned about AI. Maybe we'll talk about it later. But just from the NACAC conference itself, if you had to pick your top 3 takeaways that really stood out to the both of you, why do they matter for students and families navigating the college admissions process?
I think first and foremost, as Katherine already mentioned, AI, it's changing the landscape. It changes how our students work in terms of essays. It changes a lot of things, or even changes our art applicants. A lot of art applicants we saw were using AI art. And so admissions officers were talking there about like their views on AI art as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of new admissions requirements to help combat some of this, or to help reposition this and really think about the tangible impact that's happening in admissions, where colleges are trying to evaluate applications in a different way, where they're trying to find those really authentic applicants beyond using AI to polish their language or their essays. How do we get to know these students on a more deeper level as well? And so then again, I think like that authenticity is probably the most important part of applications as a result, especially when we're thinking, I think Katherine has attended a really interesting panel on fraud in admissions as well. And that push for authenticity across the board in your essays and video essays, for example, like Glimpse, things like that, demonstrating like different sides of who you are as well. I think that's the other thing that we always see a lot about is students have a lot of anxiety about how to disclose or how to answer questions about identity. They really encourage students to think beyond their race, their gender, their sexuality. They want to know about who you are as a person across the board. So all different sides of you, thinking a little bit outside the box and thinking creatively, like what about you is interesting? What are the things that maybe, an admissions officer wouldn't know based about your major and your pursuit of your grades and things like that? Like maybe you're great at miniature golf. Maybe you love to crochet. Maybe like you do a big family dinner and you cook, you're responsible for the dessert every Sunday or something to that effect. So they really want to see that human connection across the board.
I just want to emphasize what Pia has said. And for our families who are approaching this process, I think that finding ethical ways to use AI as a starting point and then really focusing on the thinking that you're doing in your essays to be as authentic as possible is quite important. Communicating directly with your high school guidance counselor about the most honest ways to portray anything about your background that might be sensitive. We'll talk a little bit more about like neurodiversity, which is something that is becoming much more prevalent in college applications. So again, authenticity above all, making sure that everything you're doing to even prepare for college is authentic. In that 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, you want the things that you're going to be talking about in your application, the activities that you're doing, to be as authentic as possible. Get out into your community, like Pia said. Make sure that you're doing things with real people. It's going to be so much easier moving forward to have an app that AI created for you. And that type of an activity on your activities list won't be as impactful as something that truly is something you could only have done in your community.
I think I want to touch on AI right now because we talked a lot about it. Are there practical tools they can use at home, or like how to really use it effectively to make sure that they don't fully rely on AI to prepare their college applications?
AI as a tool for time management is one of the best things that students can do. If they are using AI for time management so that they won't have to spend as much time making a schedule for college visits or making a timeline for how they're going to prepare all of their applications, then they will have more time to work on the essays and the things that actually matter to demonstrate that authenticity. So I would say use AI like an assistant, but use your own brain for your thinking. And if you can try and use that sort of dichotomy, you'll be in good hands.
Yeah, that's a great answer across the board. I think like using AI for things like school research to help you determine, like think about other schools that you might be interested in or something like that, but not using it to write your essays. I think from the arts panel, like on the art side, a lot of students are interested in exploring AI art, as I mentioned, and it's just not as strong as students' actual work. So AI hasn't quite caught up in that area, and there's still gaps in AI all the time. We don't want families and students especially to rely on them and rely on AI too much and think that like it'll address all those issues that they're arising. They're worthwhile candidates even without AI support or AI enhancement.
Going back to the policy shifts and with the adapting to visa restrictions for international students, are there any opportunities for students thinking about transfers or studying abroad? How are colleges adapting to this change?
Great question. We saw that there are significant issues with enrollment of international students who were not able to get their visas approved from many different places. And all of the colleges who we were interacting with at NACAC were zeroed in on this. They wanted to know how they were going to be able to get their international students back on campus and make sure that they fill in all of these gaps and support international students. There was a really strong support for international students and all of the barriers that they're facing currently. One of the admissions officers said that everything is on the table. Basically, they want to get international students to enroll a little bit later, maybe not enrolling for the fall semester, but starting in the spring semester, or have a remote semester where they're able to do their classes from their home country. In some situations, there are colleges that have international campuses. So in those cases, they're encouraging these students to enroll in an international campus in the UK, in China, in other places in the world. And then that way they can start there and continue their studies in the US once they're finished with that. I do think that there will be likely opportunities for students to transfer in more capacity than there has been in the past, because there will be spots left open from students who were not able to attain visas. So that's an important piece, I think, specifically for this year and for this year's transfers. We also saw on the flip side that there was a lot more interest from US students who are thinking about studying abroad because of the political climate in the US. There were whole panels on what can US students do if they want to apply to colleges in the UK or Canada. And that's a new avenue for applications that we haven't seen quite as much in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to hear from Canadian schools talking about this increase in applications and encouraging students to really consider Canada as a potential avenue there as well. And particularly, I thought was interesting was that in terms of selectivity for Canadian students, which is a question that I get a lot from US-based students about, if I apply to schools in Canada, can I get in? Like, where would I go? Canadian schools are just it's a very different process. And they're a lot more, I would say, transparent than the US, quite frankly. So you can absolutely, when you're list building, you pay more attention to the program than the university. So like thinking about like your actual major choice, that's going to play, there's going to be different requirements depending on what program you're applying to versus the university itself. And you want to make sure that you meet those program requirements overall. And if you have questions, they just encourage you to reach out to the admissions office, ask them, see if this is what my GPA is. Can I fit into this program? But I do think like a lot of our Canadian universities are great options for our students who are, as Katherine mentioned, like really nervous about the US landscape and wanting, whether it's their main option or a backup option too, like that they're thinking of.
I just wanted to add, I think it was a little bit mind-blowing for Pia and me when we heard from these admissions officers in Canada that you could just email them and say, am I a competitive candidate for your university? because that is so literally foreign to anyone who is thinking about the US admissions policies. You would never get a straight answer based on the holistic review process in US colleges. So I think it was very refreshing to hear that type of transparency from Canadian universities. I heard similar things from UK representatives as well. And there seems to be a big push from UK universities to recruit students from the United States. Apparently, there was something like a 14% increase from 2023 to 2024 of US students who are going to UK universities. And I'll put a little plug here. It's a 3-year path in most cases instead of a 4-year path. So you may actually save a significant amount on tuition if you're thinking about a fund to those UK schools.
That's pretty interesting because I don't think we've ever talked about the differences of like how applications are being considered in different regions or different parts of the world. While we're talking about challenges still, I believe the conference also highlighted risks around application fraud. Katherine, you mentioned earlier.
Yes, definitely. This was fascinating. I will say this was one of the most well-attended sessions. Everyone wanted to know about admissions fraud, and specifically 2 very high-level representatives from NYU came and talked about some case studies that they had seen. Some of the most interesting takeaways were that I think many people assume that admissions fraud may be something like students saying that their extracurricular activity took 6 hours a week when really it was only 4. And that is something that is likely happening in a lot of places, and colleges don't want you to be exaggerating what you do, but they're also aware that portraying your activities is not an exact science, and they understand a little bit of leeway in terms of that type of description of your activities. Instead, admissions fraud is actually something that is far more serious and involves really falsifying identity, especially with regards to the transcript. So a couple of different types of fraud that were discussed are things like transcript forgery, where there's just a completely new transcript that is being sent in on behalf of the student, sometimes by their high school, sometimes by the student themselves. In some cases, what happens is that a student has attended a previous high school and then transfers, and the new high school will misrepresent in some way the grades from the previous high school, and then the student doesn't send in the transcript from that previous high school. One of the most serious areas of admissions fraud is in transfer students. So one of the things that is happening now is that admissions offices are requiring e-transcripts from transfer students instead of accepting anything by mail. That's one of the ways that they are making sure that there is equity and limitation of fraud for those specific applications. One of the last types of fraud that they see are, in some cases, high schools that are in international locations, which essentially pose as US institutions because of potentially a partnership with that high school. In some cases, the US high school isn't even aware of this partnership, and the international high school will misrepresent the transcripts that they send in, which can be very serious because if the college is evaluating a transcript that looks like it's coming from a US high school, they may decide that they don't need a TOEFL score or English language proficiency requirements from that student because they think the student has been studying in the US, when in reality, they are at this sort of ghost school that may exist abroad. The NYU admissions office has what they call the fraud squad that they have deployed to make sure that they're investigating all of these sort of red flags that happen in the admissions process. And they'll even go on Google Maps to see where the high school is, go and see Street View. Does this look like a high school? What's going on here? They described that they might even go to the location and try and film it. They've been in situations where they went to the high school address and it was like an abandoned warehouse. So I think that the level of fraud that they are seeing these days is to a very different level than what you might have seen in other places. And they want to be very serious about treating this severely because they do not want any students to be able to attain admission to a university using these methods.
I assume that the consequences is pretty big if the student gets caught. Is there a possibility that, I guess, the admissions officer didn't catch any red flags and then they'll be caught even after starting college?
Yes, actually. In several cases, students who had been flagged for admissions fraud, who did end up attending the university, were then expelled from that university and even had all of their credit canceled as a result. There was one particular student who had been in college for 3.5 years and was discovered to have committed admissions fraud. She lost all of her credit from all of those years of college, which is so sad. But again, I think it's an important stance for colleges to take in terms of dissuading students from trying any of these types of methods. Similarly, if there are high schools that have been identified as perpetrating this type of fraud, they get flagged, and then other students applying from those high schools will get a very detailed read of their applications to make sure that there is nothing going on that is unethical.
I think it just goes to show the level of competitiveness that we're seeing across the admissions landscape, that some families feel the urge to go with this approach, and it's scary a little bit, but I'm glad that it's being caught. And I also think it hopefully reassures the students who, as Katherine mentioned, we get students all the time who are like, oh, is this accurate? Is this accurate enough? Are they going to find, I only did this in the summer, this for this many weeks, but I accidentally put 2 more weeks on my application and it's too late. I turned it in. It's those small little elements, those aren't what they're looking for. It's these bigger underlying issues. Again, encouraging students to be honest and truthful and accurate in their reporting of who they are, because they do have to sign that they are doing this, that they're filling this out to the best of their knowledge and that they're representing themselves accurately. And colleges take that seriously too.
I saw a couple of stats and numbers from your conference takeaway notes. It says that since 2019, there's been an 88% increase in students who self-identify as neurodiverse, and also a 160% increase for students with multiple disabilities. So colleges where at least 10% of the students have learning differences have quadrupled. So that's a pretty big insight there. Can you explain why and what factors families should consider when deciding whether to disclose some of these?
Thanks, Jillian. I wanted to just add on, that's an 88% increase in college students who self-identify as neurodiverse. So these are students who are actually in college, have a learning disability or learning difference, and are doing a great job in college. One thing that I want to emphasize there is that colleges are expecting students with learning differences to be applying to their universities and are prepared. In most cases, colleges have really robust resources for students and are building more every day so that these students can get access to what they need in college in order to be successful. I think that there is still a lot of hesitation from many families who think that they should not be saying anything about a learning difference in their application because they worry that the colleges will not be able to support that student. And everything that we saw at the conference showed that's not true. Colleges are ready to support students with learning differences, but I think the key point is that students need to be ready to take advantage of resources. So I'll start by saying students should feel comfortable disclosing if they have a learning difference if they want to. If a student does not want to and feels that their academic record is really truthful and they've been able to be quite successful in college, then they may not want to say anything about a learning difference. But if there is a reason, maybe there was a grade dip or there was something else that happened in their transcript. In some cases, students do not take a foreign language because they are in some sort of student support class. They may want to identify that in their application in the additional information section, and that's totally okay. The panel that I went to for this particular session was made up of both admissions officers and high school guidance counselors. And so they talked about a balanced approach of communication across that gap, which is really appropriate for all students who may have a learning difference. Crucially, the student and family need to be talking with their guidance or college counselor about how they are disclosing this information, because you want there to be a unified strategy in how you're disclosing and what you're saying about that learning difference. So I think that's probably the most important takeaway. Colleges are not stigmatizing learning differences. They're ready to support students. And if you feel like it is meaningful for you to disclose that, then by all means you should.
Would you say that executive functioning then would be a good way to prepare better for college if a student has experiencing some learning differences throughout high school?
A very important takeaway that we had from this session is that the paradigm for how students with learning differences can access supports changes drastically from high school to college. When they're in high school, The support that they are getting is about ensuring that they have access to academic success. And things like extended deadlines or longer times for tests are the types of supports that they have access to in order to have that academic success. When they turn 18, there's actually a different law that's governing their access to resources on a college campus. And it's no longer about academic success. It's about having access to appropriate resources so that the student can have that academic success on their own, which is a little bit different than when you're in high school and you might have a whole team helping you make that process, helping you make that progress. In college, it's up to you as a student to be able to get those resources. So you are not going to get extended time. You are not going to get extended deadlines. You do have all sorts of tutors and support at a student support or student services center, but you have to go. You have to take advantage of those resources. For all of these reasons, executive functioning and being able to take advantage of resources is probably one of the most important things for students with learning differences to prepare for when they make that transition to college.
I think it's also so important for students from a young age to learn how to advocate for themselves. And that's something that I think a lot of students learn throughout the college application process as well, because we see how important it is in college. Nobody's going to reach out to you. You have to go find them. And so getting comfortable with that, feeling confident about it from a young age can only help enhance your time at college so that you're taking advantage of all those wonderful resources that are offered to you there.
Straying away from the conference and your takeaways there, but I just want to know from both of you, your perspectives, how are colleges handling holistic reviews this year? Are there any like trends in supplemental essays, like discussing about race or community involvement that students and families should know about?
For across the board, we've seen a lot of questions about community and how that human connection that we talked about earlier, right? Like they're looking for authenticity. They're looking for who you are as a person so that they can imagine you on their campus. Are you going to be the student in the lab that stays in the lab, or are you going to be the student out trying new things, joining different groups, exploring your different interests? So I think across the board, we saw this real push via essays, via video profiles, to really showcase like all the different sides of who you are. And again, not just your major or like the accolades that you've earned or the apps that you've created. What do you do for fun? What do you do to build community? Who are you in community with? And so I think in terms of a holistic review point, like all admissions officers want to see that whole idea of who you are. They want to see different sides of you rather than just the computer scientist who gets excellent grades and perfect testing, but we don't know much about you beyond the fact that like you love coding. We want to see something else too. And again, it needs to be that push to think creatively, to think locally, to think about ways you can make an impact in those around you too. And bringing that into your essays, it will help create like a more multidimensional candidate overall.
I think Pia has done an excellent job of explaining it. Colleges, in many cases, are adding, as Pia mentioned, community essays, and in also many cases, asking about identity and what that means to students. And that is a very broad question. Students can talk about their race. They don't have to talk about their race. There are many ways that you can talk about your identity. And I encourage students to really think deeply about the different ways that they can express identity. If that means that it's their identity as the libero on their volleyball team and what it means to be that person in a volleyball team, or if that means that it's their identity within their family structure and how they relate to their grandparents. Those types of things are just as valuable as talking about something like race.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that we have not talked about today that you would want to bring up or would benefit families and students who are listening to right now?
I do think that this message of authenticity is really something that we're stressing as much as possible. Stress it in 9th grade, in 10th grade. Colleges want to see students who get off their phones and do things in their communities. The more that students can do that, the better. The more they can be in community with others, the better. And I think that's something that we saw across the board from all of the high school counselors we interacted with, all of the admissions officers who are at the conference.
And that wraps up today's episode. Thank you, Katherine and Pia, for sharing your insights with us from the NACAC conference. And families, take what resonates, plan strategically, and remember you're not navigating this journey alone. If you'd like some personalized guidance, schedule a free consultation with us. Details are in the description below. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.